This is a story about the project that almost turned into firewood. Jess wanted a kitchen stool for Morgan. After looking around for the inspiration, I loosely based mine off of the one Mark Spagnolo built for his kids.
Now we do have to talk about a safety issue here. When you're climbing up on this side, it tends to want to lift up, and I think some dowel pins should do the trick.
The problem started with the dowels. See, I had never made my own dowels before, but the rest of the project seemed pretty straightforward, so I wanted to make my own dowels before I started the project. Since these were going to be visible just good enough, wasn't going to cut it. After many attempts and advice from comments, I gave up and ordered some brass rod instead. In the meantime, I'd skip planed and straight lined some walnut I had lying around. These came from a sawyer who said they had milled some branches. I should have known better. Not only did the sawyer leave parts of the pith in the wood, but branches are normally considered reaction wood. Since they grow trying to combat the forces of gravity, unlike the trunk which grows straight up, not out, there are added stresses in the wood which react when you start to mill the wood. Cupping, twisting, checking, and cracking are all defects that a reaction wood is prone to. Mark used loose tenon joinery courtesy of his Festool Domino to join his pieces. Since I don't have that tool and wasn't going to spend that kind of money, I chose to use traditional mortise and tenons. This is when I realized I forgot to account for the added length of the tenons. I figured I would come back to that and use a contrasting wood for the inner frame pieces, and yeah, account for some tenons. I had some leftover quarter sawn white oak from the media console project, so I used that. For the tenons, I used my crosscut sled on the table saw with a stop block in place. It's so simple and it works great. Then I laid out my mortises and hogged out the waste with the Forstner bit at the drill press, using the depth stop so I didn't go too deep. Then I squared my mortises with a chisel and tested the fit. I wanted to use knockdown joinery so I could dismantle the stool to store it once Morgan was older. For this, I was using threaded inserts. So for the cross stretchers, I made the tenons with no cheeks to have more material to drive the inserts into. Then I cut the appropriate sized mortises. It was going great until I got to the last mortise. The wood split. Motherfucker. Okay, I'll just fix it with a butterfly, I thought. Piece of shit. To address the non-tenoned rails on each side assembly, I decided that biscuits would be strong enough with the other tenons still intact. So I marked for biscuits and holes for the inserts. With everything dry assembled, I drilled the through holes for the hardware using a tape flag on the drill bit to mark the depth. Then I dismantled the stool and cut the slots for the biscuits. When it was time to glue the side assemblies, it turned out to be a pretty stressful glue up. I got overwhelmed. Since I had never used threaded inserts before, I thought, hey, let's test one on some scrap. Problem was, I only had the exact amount I needed. My wife says it's good to have a project humble you every once in a while, bring you back down to earth. Reminds you that even simple projects can have setbacks. Builds character, she says. Bullshit. The next day I revisited the inserts with a slightly larger bit. I was worried there wasn't enough thread engagement in the wood, so I added some epoxy. While that dried, I worked on the lower platform, which I'm making out of curly white oak I had left over from the desk build. After getting all the pieces flat and square, I cut them down to length with my crosscut sled to glue up the panel. While all of that other stuff was drying, I found a small live edge piece of walnut for the top step, planed it and cut a relatively straight edge on one of the sides, then cleaned it up at the joiner. Upon revisiting the threaded inserts, I can't say I was surprised to find the epoxy had found its way into the threads. Awesome. I cleaned that up with a tap. Then it was time to assemble the frame. In the haste of trying to get the side frames glued up, I starved one of the joints of glue. More butterflies! After getting the frame assembled, for real this time, I cut some notches in the top step, then added some side cleats for the bottom platform to rest on. Added cleats to the underside of both the platform and the step, then got to finishing. I wanted this thing out of my shop. I used Danish oil. I thought about a film finish, but, well, I used Danish oil, okay? All frustration and cursing aside, I am truly happy to have this thing in my kitchen. It was my gift to Morgan this Christmas, and among all of the other wonderful gifts Morgan received this year from everyone in the family, she really seems to love being at counter height with Jess and me. She's already spent a ton of time on the stool, and to me, that makes it all worth it.